Hello, and welcome to another episode of Tea Time with Eddie. So, on this beautiful Saturday, being the 1st of April, which, is that April Fool's? I'm actually not quite too sure. It very well could be the 1st of April. So what I would like to talk about with the consideration of the environment, which I have just sort of displayed with an appearance, is the idea of somewhat more of an advanced method of purifying bad habits. And the exact method of doing this involves awareness. And it also involves a little bit of confidence and possibly a slight amount of reasoned faith as well. Seems I have a bit of an audience. There are a little troop of deer watching me at the moment, which is actually pretty great. Sort of like, given the sort of circumstances of this environment, of this parkway in general, the deer, I mean, obviously, the deer do have like a natural understanding of when they see people that they have to keep their distance and be somewhat cautious. But the deer that live in this area don't have a fear of being hunted, because these are like federally protected lands. And it's very important to have sanctuaries such as this, to allow for a certain sense of like being at ease. And a certain possibility to grow and not have to worry about certain kinds of threats. And just as it is true and is beneficial for the deer, people need this as well. And what you can do when you have such circumstances, if you have a good environment, an environment in which you feel like you are able to have, to a certain extent, the ability to observe appearance from a perspective almost as if you're looking down, from like an objective perspective looking down above appearance. If you feel like you have a certain circumstances to do this, and one of the primary like conditions that one would kind of hope for to have these kind of circumstances is to have what is known as like leisure and opportunity. And these are very important things. Leisure connects with opportunity. If you have the ability to use your mind, your precious human intelligence, to investigate and think about, various kinds of rather deep topics of contemplation that don't necessarily that come as a result of your basic needs being provided for. One of those needs having a sense of feeling of safety in your environment. Then what you can do is start purifying your mind in slightly more profound and amazing ways in which kind of are flawlessly connected with flawlessly connected with making the most of your human lifetime. And one of these more advanced methods to help purify bad habits, whether these are habits in which you adopt or practice on a very large scale, or subtle mental habits, is to have essentially a strength of awareness. And two, actually, if you have this strength of awareness, to actually experience these habits to the fullest, to not run away from indulging in them. And that's the key right there, and that's why I consider this to be a more advanced method of purification. Although, to a certain extent, it is necessary to truly purify oneself to whatever degree you wish to actually experience these habits to the fullest. And so what exactly does this mean? One would think that if you really wanted to purify yourself through the through actually like indulging in bad habits, one would think, well, wouldn't that just make things worse? Wouldn't that just make you want to essentially exercise these habits more? But I think it's important to understand that why is it do we have these bad habits in the first place? Now, what exactly is a bad habit? Well, essentially, to really get down to the nuts and bolts of what a bad habit really is, it is an activity that you perform. Whether it is like a chain of particular thoughts that you indulge in, or that chain of thoughts leading into a chain of actions, which are much more easy to perceive. Like, for instance, someone has a bad habit of being an alcoholic. They indulge in too much alcohol and they don't consider the things which are more important than the satisfaction of that habit. And why is it though considered a bad habit? Even though it's kind of obvious if you like perceive it with your intelligence and sense of morality and your sense of like priorities. Why is it that this is considered to be a bad habit? And basically, it's considered to be a bad habit because you are engaging in actions. It's kind of a young deer just wandering around over here. You could probably hear him, actually. It's because you engage in activities with a motivation of satisfying a separate self from the world around you. And I think it's using the analogy of an alcoholic and the alcoholic's bad habits, you can kind of see that. You can see that that person is doing whatever he or she can to satisfy their craving for alcohol, and they are implementing whatever means necessary to do this. And they're not thinking about all of the factors that go into the satisfaction of this habit. They're not thinking about the energy that they're using, the methods that they're using to obtain this substance. And eventually, because the drive to obtain this substance becomes the number one priority, that him or her, what they do is they engage in actions which exploits, exploit the preciousness of their relationships, because they don't quite understand their connection to these relationships. They don't understand that these relationships have come as a result of a feeling of like connectivity that they had been forming their life. This feeling of, kind of like shared consciousness. And so as a result of that, they're not really thinking about the fact that they're harming themselves just as much as they're harming others through the satisfaction of this habit, because they have this idea that this person that they're satisfying through the use of alcohol is actually this person that they're satisfying through the alcohol, through the consumption of alcohol, is like the real person. This is the person that must come first. But you're not factoring in that all of these parts within perception which they are abusing are also connected with, is inseparable from this ego that they're trying to satisfy, but they think it is. And so as a result of that, it becomes a bad habit. And so, how is it then, how can one then actually indulge in a bad habit and actually purify it? That's the real key right there. And so that's why this, like I said, is a very advanced method. It involves the strength of mindfulness, the strength of awareness, the ability to really think about what's happening while it's happening. And oftentimes the actions that people undertake, the repetitive cycles that people go through, that cause themselves harm and others harm, are because while they're engaging in these cycles, they're actually not paying attention to what they're doing. They're not paying attention to what they're doing in the right ways. They're not really being mindful within the moment. Instead, they are seeking a particular kind of release. They're seeking a particular kind of like satisfaction. And what they're doing is the process of getting to that point, all they're thinking about is the satisfaction, and they're not thinking about what they're doing during the process of getting to this point of satisfaction. While the actual moment of release occurs, there is an extreme brevity to it. And while it's actually happening, there is still, even within that very moment, a lingering need to know that they have to do what they can to repeat this experience in future instances. And then after the experience is done of release, the initial like satisfaction for the moment, they are now once again engaging in the cycle of repeating this bad habit and doing what they can to further this experience, because they're not necessarily really paying attention to everything they do during the whole entire process. So how can, by paying attention to every single little thing you do during the process of indulging in a bad habit, how exactly can this purify the habit in the long run? And I do believe this is where it comes rather important to have a certain sense, a combination of reasoned faith and a genuine experience of feeling a sense of non-duality with oneself and the universe as a whole. And so basically, what this means is it's important to get to a point through mindfulness practice, through concentration, mindfulness practice which combines concentration and also awareness. So when you are engaging in the mindfulness practice, you are concentrating on a singular object. And when your mind trails off from that object, you remain aware of yourself as you trail off. And then once you have that awareness of where you're trailing off to, you just go back to the object of meditation. You don't force yourself back to the object of meditation. You notice what it is with your clarity and your awareness. You notice what it is you're looking at. And when you notice this, then you go right back to your concentration. When you notice this, you stop. What happens when you notice this trailing off of the mind during your mindfulness meditation, which is a good thing to notice this. That's the whole point of mindfulness meditation, is to notice these things. When you notice it, what you're doing is you're stopping the chain of thought after thought after thought, of elaboration after elaboration of this point. And it naturally occurs when you are aware of this chain of elaboration. And then you go right back to your source of concentration once again. And basically what you're learning to do is to be exactly within the moment and refrain from elaborating upon appearance, whether it's the appearance that forms in your mind or the appearance that you see outside of yourself, which is also connected to within the mind. And eventually, when you get stronger at this, when you have this sense of mindfulness in your daily actions, you can actually purify your bad habits by being like, I have a feeling like right now to light up a cigarette and smoke a cigarette. But what I am going to do while I light up this cigarette and smoke a cigarette, this is to name an example, of course, I am going to be aware of the whole process of doing this. I am not necessarily going to distract myself while I'm smoking the cigarette by flipping through my cell phone, which would be a very practical thing to do. I'm instead going to just stand here and smoke this cigarette and monitor myself throughout the whole entire process. And Really pay attention to how my body feels, how my mind feels as it's happening. Breathe in as hard as I want to my satisfaction. Exhale as slowly as I want. Get a little bit of a buzz. And really just pay attention to this whole entire process. And what will happen as a result of this is that the psychological aspects of smoking a cigarette, which can become addictive, what you are doing essentially is not pushing away from these psychological aspects and not really clinging to them as well, because you're not necessarily like taking your mind away through a chain of elaboration of the bliss or pleasure of the experience as well. And if you do this consistently, if you really have this chain of mindfulness that abolishes this chain of elaboration, eventually these habits will just dissipate on their own, because you're facing them and you're developing confidence, because you know that you have the power to face these things. You also feel like you're really doing something special with your human intelligence, because the purification of this habit in particular has far-reaching implications that are actually hard to fathom. And they also are representative of deep-seated tendencies that have been within one's consciousness for, if you really wish to get into the Buddhist cosmological approach, which does have benefits to get into, these tendencies have formed over countless lifetimes. And you can rejoice in the fact that at this moment, because you are learning to purify this habit in particular, you are actually purifying countless other manifestations of this addictive personality that you can analyze throughout your own lifetime, which is the most practical thing to do, and see what you are doing as beneficial through that. And also as well, you can start gaining a bit of an appreciation that this tendency that you can analyze in this lifetime, it didn't just come from nowhere. It came from somewhere else. It came from a chain that was continuing beyond your most earliest memory. And so, yes, purification of bad habits. I state you can do this if you have a proper environment of leisure and opportunity. You have gained a certain sense of meditative equipoise, particularly in the realm of mindfulness, and have a sort of understanding of the fact that suffering is a result of various causes and conditions.